Look, I'll concede if this war killed children at a school, I think that's a tragedy, and the U.S. has to investigate.
It's not a tragedy, it's a war crime.
Well, look, we know horrible things happen in war, and I hope that didn't happen. I hope the U.S. wasn't responsible. But you're welcome to pick at the mistakes made in this war. You know things are going to be made like this.
What happens when a defense begins by admitting the very thing it's trying to justify? Because in this moment, something subtle but important takes place. The argument doesn't start with certainty, it starts with concession. And once that door is opened, the entire foundation becomes vulnerable. What follows isn't just a disagreement over policy, but a slow and methodical examination of whether this justification can actually withstand scrutiny.
I think degrading Iran's capability of destabilizing the region and the world, wiping out its nuclear program, a missile program that could soon hit the UK with nuclear weapons, is certainly in the interest of the UK. That's why I wish the UK was with us on this. We're also creating an historic opportunity. I don't know what's going to happen for the Iranian people to overthrow this terrible regime. And with the death of Ali Rajani overnight, the head of Iran's security services, one of the leading hawks in the country, is really increasing the possibility that the Iranian people may be able to take back their country.
Stephen, what do you say to that?
I'm somewhat bemused by what I'm listening to, because if you're seeking to liberate people, I don't think that involves blowing up a primary school with little kids inside of it. I don't think that means destroying all the civilian infrastructure, including desalination plants, which are crucial for people to have access to safe drinking water. The reality is that the US president has started an illegal war. He has announced that he has won that war, and yet is now backpedaling and asking others to come and help. He's trying not to be a policeman.
Now the justification meets a direct challenge. The focus shifts from intentions to consequences.
He's trying and continuing to be a global bully. And the only person who's brought instability to the Middle East, only two people, are Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump, because Donald Trump was gullible enough to follow the plan that Benjamin Netanyahu has wanted to exercise for the last 30 years. And I hate to say it, but the only beneficiary of this is Vladimir Putin, who appears to have sanctions lifted and appears to be getting ever deeper pockets. So I'm somewhat bemused and angry at the position taken by the gentleman who seeks to lecture us on these issues, when what he should be doing is turning his fire internally and telling his president to get around the table and to get a diplomatic solution.
Fred?
Oh, a diplomatic solution with the Iranians. They haven't negotiated in good faith in decades. Well, look, I'll concede if this war killed children at a school, I think that's a tragedy, and the U.S. has to investigate.
It's not a tragedy, it's a war crime.
Well, look, we know horrible things happen in war, and I hope that didn't happen. I hope the U.S. wasn't responsible. But you're welcome to pick at the mistakes made in this war. You know things are going to be made like this.
Instead of answering the criticism directly, the argument pivots toward a broader threat.
But who's responsible for this? Iran's Islamist regime that's been pursuing nuclear weapons, that has been sending assassination squads through Europe, including in the UK. And I think the Iranian diaspora that has been celebrating this operation in the UK has a different opinion.
You can agree that the IRGC are terrorists and appalling without agreeing that the president's actions were proportionate and deserved. Killing children is a war crime, and your government should apologise.
And with respect to what Stephen's been putting forward there, you've also got to recognise the importance of Britain's military capability and the ability that we have to defend our interests in the region, which, if we were to follow your party's principles, we would not be able to do that.
Sorry, what are you doing in the region just now? How many vessels have you got there?
Yeah, look, I think
we've got.
Tell me how many.
But what would be your so your position on Trident, for example, your decision recently?
Is Trident in the Middle East? I'm confused.
But no.
Now, the debate narrows. It's no longer about threats, but proportionality.
But more than nuclear capability is very, very important in defending British interests, and the SNP would have us completely remove ourselves from that.
We've showed up late. The government has been underprepared. And the Prime Minister has no backbone. He doesn't know what he thinks. He has to ask other people to give him his opinions. We have a naval base in Bahrain that is there for minesweepers, for British minesweepers. There are no British minesweepers in that naval base. We've been completely caught asleep at the wheel, and the Prime Minister has to step up in the interests of Britain.
OK, well, let's just listen to your leader, Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the opposition. Let's hear what she had to say about President Trump.
The words coming from the White House are completely wrong. I think it's actually quite childish. There is a lot that can be said behind closed doors. We've got President Zelensky in our country today. The Western alliance having an argument with itself, I think, sends the wrong signal.
Fred, what do you say to that? Kemi Badenoch has been incredibly supportive, actually, of President Trump, but even she now is saying that his words are childish.
The discussion expands again, but clarity begins to fade.
Well, I think we have an operation that's been fairly successful here, and I also think that President is about to wind it down because we've achieved our objectives. The next phase is to stand with the Iranian people and try to support their efforts to overthrow this government. And I might add another point concerning the attack on the British base in Cyprus and attacks by the Iranians or just about every country in the Middle East. These missiles were pre-positioned. Iran was prepared to attack UK bases and every nation in the Middle East. I mean, this nation is a regional threat. This threat was simply going to grow. By the end of this year, it would have amassed a missile shield that would have made it impossible to take preemptive action against its nuclear program. Is this a perfect solution? No. We can't do this through the UN. So arguments that, well, this is a violation of international law. How can we stop Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons through the UN? Is anyone in the program, do you have an answer to that?
Stephen?
Yeah, of course, by dialogue and discussion, just like President Obama did and President Biden did. You know, Benjamin Netanyahu has been trying to get you guys to go to war with Iran for decades. Everyone else has said no, but Donald Trump was daft enough to say yes. And now
Here, the argument reaches its strongest claim, necessity.
the entire region is a complete mess and it's having an impact upon all of our lives. That is his responsibility alone, and he needs to now fix it.
Fred?
Now, I think we know right now that the nuclear deal that Obama negotiated was a fraud, that Iran was cheating on it. It was enriching to 60% uranium-235 during the Biden administration, despite Biden's efforts to appease Iran to get a nuclear deal. Don't tell me we could negotiate away this nuclear program. The Iranians are liars. They've never negotiated in good faith. I regret that this was the only solution to this program before the Iranians got a nuclear bomb.
At the end of this exchange, what stands out isn't just the disagreement, it's the structure of the arguments themselves. On one side, there's a consistent attempt to justify action based on future risk. The idea is simple. If a threat is serious enough, then extreme measures can be defended as necessary. But that reasoning depends entirely on one assumption, that the outcome justifies the method. On the other side, the focus remains grounded in what has already happened. Civilian casualties, destroyed infrastructure, escalation across an already fragile region. These aren't hypothetical risks, they are observable consequences. And once those consequences are acknowledged, the debate shifts into a different territory entirely. Because at that point, the question is no longer whether a threat exists. The question becomes whether the response respected any limits at all. What makes this moment particularly significant is how the justification begins to rely less on evidence and more on inevitability. Phrases like, "this was the only solution," attempt to close the discussion entirely. But they also introduce a critical weakness, because if no alternatives are seriously considered, then the argument stops being analytical and becomes absolute. And absolute arguments are often the easiest to challenge. What we see here is not just a clash of opinions, but a clash of frameworks. One prioritizes preemptive action and strategic dominance. The other insists on accountability, legality, and proportionality, and neither side fully resolves the tension between them. But the pressure point remains clear. If civilian harm is acknowledged, even hypothetically, then the burden of proof doesn't decrease, it increases. And that's where the defense begins to struggle. Because once that standard is applied consistently, it forces a conclusion that is much harder to avoid than any political disagreement. So now the question turns to you. Was this truly the only option? Or was it a decision that bypassed alternatives and is now being justified after the fact? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more calm, fact-based breakdowns like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Stay tuned for more analysis only here.